Okay, in this video, we're going to answer a few questions about marginal and conditional distributions using the two-way table on this page. So this two-way table is about the Titanic, and we have two categorical variables that we're using. The first is survival status, so did the individual survive or die on the Titanic? And then also the type of ticket, so was the passenger holding a first class, second class, or third class ticket, or were they a member of the crew? So first thing let's talk about is we want to answer the question of giving the marginal distributions of survival status. Okay, so for everyone in the entire sample, what percent survived and what percent died? And this is our marginal distribution. So I'm just going to put an S for survive and then a D for died, just because we're going to be using those a lot throughout the this whole video. Okay. So I want to know how many people survived. I'm going to look at the total number of surviving people, which was 711. And I'm going to divide that by the total number of people that were on that ship that day. So again, when we're looking at marginal distributions, we're just looking at those total rows and columns. So if you type this into your calculator, you're going to get 0.323 and then some more decimals. And I want to give my answer as a percent. So remember, 0.323 is going to be 32.3%. So you want to make sure that you're rounding appropriately with these. So you want to be careful with that. So 32.3% survived the Titanic crash. And then to figure out what percent died, I would just take the total number that died and divide it by the total number of people that were on the ship. And I am going to get 0.677, which is the same as 67.7%. Okay, so it's kind of crazy to think that 67.7% of the people on that ship died. That's a really large number. So again, to find these ones, we're looking at the total in the survival class divided by the total people that were on the ship. Okay, let's look at the next question, which is giving the marginal distribution of the type of each type of ticket. Okay, so we're kind of doing the same thing, but now we want to know how many people were in first class, right? So we know that there was a total of 325 people in first class, and there was a total of 2,201 people total on the Titanic. So when we divide those two, that's going to tell us what percent of the total number of people were in first class. I'm just going to write this as a percent. Hopefully you guys are feeling comfortable converting decimals to percents. So 14.8% of my people were in first class. Okay. To figure out second class, I would look at the total in second class. So 285 people were in second class out of the total 2,201 that were on the ship, and that's 12.9%. So 12.9% of the passengers were in second class. Okay. We would do the same thing with third class and with the crew. We're just going to take the total number of, for example, the third class total number 706 over 2,201, and that's going to be our percentage. I'm going to let you guys work those ones out on your own. One thing to just know is that we're going to want to give our answers as percents almost always. Percents are usually a really easy and accepted way of talking about marginal distributions. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about some conditional distributions. So remember, conditional distributions are when we're looking at a specific category within another category. So we're going to start looking at like how many people survived within first class, how many people died within first class. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next page. You might need to maybe screenshot or take a picture of this table, and so that as we start filling in these next answers, you understand where the numbers come from. So we're going to give the conditional distribution for survival status of people with first class tickets. So here we're just looking at people with first class tickets. So that's just the 325 people that had a first class ticket. And we want to know what percent survived and then what percent died. So if you look at the total number of first class that survived, that's going to be 203 people that were in first class and that survived out of the total 325 people that were in first class. So that means that 62.5% of the people in first class survived. And then if we do the same thing, kind of looking at how many people died, we're going to say we had 122 people die out of the 325 that were in first class. So 37.5% of the first class passengers died in the Titanic crash. Then we're going to do the same thing with all the other different class tickets. Okay, so if we look at second class, we're going to look at how many people survived. So we had 118 people survive out of the 285 that were in second class. So again, here we're only looking at that second class, the second class row. So it's 41.4% that survived. And then we had 167 out of the 285 who died, which is 58.6%. Okay, here I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to let you guys fill in the conditional distributions for the third class tickets and the crew. I'm going to fill them in too. So hit pause here and then hit play again and you can check your answers. Okay, so hopefully these are the answers that you got as you found the conditional distributions. You want to make sure that you are rounding to the right, that you're rounding correctly. So with these, we're rounding to the first decimal place, so to the nearest tenth. And if you made mistakes with your rounding, if your answers don't match mine, you're going to want to go back and correct those mistakes and make sure that you understand why you got them wrong. So just looking at these set of percents, we can see some interesting things. So if you look at your survival percents on the right here, we go from 62.5% to 41.4% to 25.2% and then to 24%. So basically, as you move lower down in the number of, in like your class ticket, the near survival rate is going down. And same thing with the death rate. The death rate's going up. So the death rate was highest when you were, for those people that were in third class and that were part of the crew. Okay, so this is a really, really interesting phenomenon, and it kind of begs the question of why that happened and how it happened. But what we're going to focus on right now, instead of looking at necessarily factors of why these percents are the way they are, is we are going to create a side-by-side bar graph to compare the distributions that we just created. So then we're going to look for some kind of similarities and differences within the data. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a bar graph, and it might have been a while, and maybe it's been a while since you've created a bar graph, but we need two axes. Along the bottom, I'm going to put the classes. So I have first class, second class, third class, and the crew. And then along the vertical axis, I am going to put percents. So this is going to be a percent over here. And maybe I'll just go by tens. So there's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. Okay. So what we're going to do is for each of the classes at the bottom, I'm going to create two different columns. I'm going to create a red column and a blue column. So we're going to let the red column, well, let's start with the blue column. We're going to let the blue column be the survival rate. So the blue is going to represent the percent that survived, and then the red is going to represent the people that died in this Titanic crash. So if I look at my first class tickets, I had 62.5% of my people survive. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and draw a blue bar that goes up to about 62.5%. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be something. I'll go ahead and shade it in. I'm going to go ahead and fill in the survival bars for all the rest of them too. So my second class had a 41.4% survival rate. It's going to go up to about right there. And obviously, if I wanted to make this super accurate, I would probably use graph paper, or at least do more than just kind of eyeball where these bars are going. Third class had a 25.2% survival rate, and then the crew was at 24, so it's just going to be a little bit smaller than third class. Okay. So those blue bars represent what percent of each class survived the Titanic crash. Let's go ahead and pull out our red marker, and we are going to sketch in some bars on the bar graph to show what percent of the people passed away or died. If you don't have colors, you're welcome to, like, maybe you'll just shade the bar that survived and leave the bar of people that passed away. So for first class, I have 37.5% of my people that passed away. Okay. Then in second class, I had 58.6. So I'm going to go up to 58.6. Then in third class, I had 74.8. And then in my crew, I had 76% that died in the Titanic crash. Okay. So now what we want to do is, now that we have this nice bar graph, we just want to look at it and say, okay, what can I actually learn from this? Okay. For one thing that I'm noticing is that the only group that had more people survive than die was my first class passengers, right? They had a higher percentage of people that survived than that died. You'll also see that the third class passengers and the crew had about the same percentage of people that survived and that died. Even though the number of people in third class and the number of people in the crew was different by like 180, the percent of people that survived were still pretty comparable, right? Another thing that to me is shocking is look at that trend of red bars. So look at the percentage of people that died in first class versus second class versus third class in the crew. Basically, the further to the right in your bar graph you go, that red bar is getting bigger and bigger, which means that more and more people are dying. So if I had ancestors that were on the Titanic, I sure hope they were in first class, right? Because they had the highest likelihood of surviving. Okay, let's talk about a couple other questions that we can ask and answer with this bar graph and with the 2A table. So let's say you're talking to one of your friends and she tries to argue that the third class tickets are actually better than second class tickets because a higher number of third class ticket holders survived the Titanic than second class ticket holders. So first of all, let's just talk about what that means. So she's saying, if I look at my 2A table, I had 178 third class people survive. I only had 118 second class people survive. So I want to be in that bigger group. I'm going to choose to buy a third class ticket. Now, that's what she's saying. The numbers that she's saying are not incorrect. But if you look at our table, and if you look at the conditional distributions that we just talked about, you'll notice that even though there might have been more people that survived that were in third class, the percentage of people in third class that survived was drastically less than those that survived that were holding second class tickets. So you would rather have a third class ticket in this case. Your chance of survival is just a little bit higher. Okay. All right, and these are the kinds of questions, this one, example H, is just such a good question because it's so easy sometimes to just look at the raw numbers instead of looking at the percents. And the percents are going to be much more revealing about what's actually going on. Let's answer 2 more questions. Using our 2A table, so we're going to jump back to our 2A table. I want to know what percent of the passengers in first class survived. Okay, so this is kind of going to help you set up your fractions. So first of all, I want to know what percent of passengers in first class. That means that the total number that I'm looking at is the people in first class. That's 325 people. And how many of those people survived? That's 203. Okay, so that means that 62.5% of my passengers in first class survived. Okay, so then let's talk about the next question. So what percent of the survivors, so the total number that we're looking at is the total number of survivors, which is 711. How many of those 711 were in the first class? And that is 203. And if I use my calculator to calculate that percent, I'm going to get 28.6%. Okay, so there's different questions. So the second question is, of all the survivors, how many were in first class? The question we asked previously, it was how many people in first class survived? Okay, so you've got to be really careful with what kind of question they're asking so you know what totals to use.